have ever done a job, stepped on a stage for a presentation, or just done this very important one meeting, despite the fact you were actually sick, you didn't feel well, you might even have been burned out? Just give me a show of hands. Yeah, guilty as charged here as well. Our next speaker is a young climate activist who was supposed to be with us last year. But very last minute, she fell sick quite severely. So I remember talking with her back then on the phone. I could tell how she was tempted to just pump herself up with painkillers and make it to the stage just because it was important to her. But in the end, she didn't. She took herself serious instead. And by that, she also honored what she's going to talk about here on stage today. Her work centers around the well-being of young activists that are suffering anxiety, depression, and burnout, because they care so much about the environment that they forget the self-care about it. Being one of them, she founded the Resilience Project at the age of 24, training young activists in resilience. And today her work is widely recognized, and she sits on IKEA's Young Global Leaders boards and others. She also just published her first book, Act, Rest, Reset, and Repeat. And from what I understand, after many years of acting, she's just about to enter a phase of resting. But before she does that, I'm so very happy to finally welcome her here on this stage, healthy and sound. Please welcome Katie Hodgetts.
Hello, everyone. I am feeling nervous, so I need to hear you. I need you to make some noise for me. How are you? Bit more. Feed me. You are just the loveliest audience. Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be here. Shall we start with a story? So, I was in Glasgow. It was February 2020. Hooray for Glasgow. And I was there with a youth group that I was campaigning with, and we were strategizing for COP26. And it was there that I got a phone call that would change the trajectory of the next few years for me. And that phone call was from another youth group that I campaign with in Bristol. Woo for Bristol. And they were telling me that our upcoming February Youth Strike protest was now going to be attended by Greta Thunberg. You are the best audience, thank you. So the expected attendance started ticking up. It was 5,000, and then it was 10,000, which was our largest strike ever, and eventually it was 30,000. And the protest was in 5 days. So I packed my bags, I left Glasgow, and I went to Bristol. And over those 5 days, I had to fundraise, I had to write a speech, had to convince my colleagues to cover my shifts at work, bribe them with wine. I had to figure out how to get sound and safety to 30,000 people. I had to convince my parents that I absolutely was not going to get arrested. And convince my brother that I absolutely was going to get arrested. And respond to messages from men who said they were going to drive their diesel cars into the crowds. To death threats from men. There is a nuanced burden on young changemakers. Take that, fast forward 5 years, add on a cost of living crisis, add on deepening insecurity, add on watching a genocide unfold on social media with what feels like to me global impunity. It's not easy being a young person. It's not easy being team human right now, right? 30,000 people did attend that protest. It was safe, it was empowering, it was extraordinary. And it all happened because young people had the courage to take action. And for me, this photo was actually a return to action after a bit of time off. And a couple years prior, I was the well-being officer for an organization I volunteered with. And I still remember being on the London tube, taking the deepest of breaths because I was so nervous, and it turns out that doesn't go away even 10 years later, to deliver my first ever well-being workshop, age 20, in response to the high rates of burnout and poor mental health that I was seeing in my peers. Then in 2019, the Greta-inspired youth strike happened, and I was now organizing with people as young as 13. And of my group, 90% were medicated for depression and anxiety. 90%. So I told myself this story, which maybe some of you in the audience can relate to, that it was my responsibility alone to protect them from heartbreak and hopelessness. And so I pinched from the leadership playbook that I saw modeled, which was mostly on telly, which was a leadership that was infallible, immovable, unshakable, didn't ask for help because it didn't need help. But I too was struggling. I too was exhausted, and I didn't know how to cope with this bizarre title that the youth will save us. So I found a way to cope, which a doctor would later call an eating disorder. Bulimia, binging and purging, was a way for me to fuel my high-octane activism and erase my mistakes. It became my secret superpower to retain the image of the perfect activist, the perfect leader. But eventually and inevitably, my mental and physical health started to decline, and I realized that it was no longer a superpower. It was a sign that I was burnt out. I was using food as a tool for stress management. And I would go on to find out that I was one of many young people who were finding methods to regain control in a world that feels like a slowly derailing train. I've now held these titles like CEO and young leader and author, but by far the proudest title I have is being someone who burnt out and came back. Resilience is not forged by how calmly we sit in the shadows, but by how tall we stand in the wicked winds. After recovery, after attending this protest, I made it my commitment, my small offering to this planet, my rent for being here, that any young person who stepped up and dedicated their energy and their innocence to the climate crisis or otherwise would not just be met with heartbreak and burnout and despair and aloneness, but they would also find joy and purpose and friendship and flourishing and aliveness. So a month after this photo, I set up the Resilience Project by youth, for youth, to be the harbour for young people. And we train young people to deliver peer support and inner development interventions in their localities, challenging how we do activism. And I actually came here straight from Kenya. I flew in from Nairobi 2 days ago. Yes, Nairobi. And we were running a resilience residential there, so a training experience for young Kenyans. And we had 14 spots available, and we had 1,247 applications. So we have the numbers. that people desire not just communities based on doing, but on being, right? It is no longer enough for us to build campaigns and movements which ignore the psychological and emotional toll on those within them. The staggering rates of burnout. Has anyone been burnt out? Yeah. It illuminates it not as a temporary setback, but as a sign of deeper, systemic and psychological misalignments. So as the world changes, change-making must too. One which bakes inner development into the center of what we're doing. One which is human-centered, not just goal-orientated, because human-centered activism is activism in its most alive form. Where are those snaps? Yes. One which allows us to step away from the burden of perfection and offer ourselves a bit more grace. Since the beginning of the Resilience Project, we've moved youth across 6 continents through our work. We've trained over 70 facilitators to deliver our interventions, and we've had our methodology validated by Stanford University and Imperial College London. I could tell you more about the numbers, but what feels more important to me is that last week a young changemaker came up to me and said to me, "I am forever changed because I finally realized that I am deserving of love." Beyond my world's obsession with metrics and numbers, it's these deep shifts which change us. Not just the 5 things to do before 5 a.m. to build resilience, but the transformational power of feeling loved and valued and feeling like you belong. Did you hear, Violetta? Right? That's how we get testimonials like this. The Resilience Project saved my life. I rediscovered what it means to rest and to rise. We got that one yesterday morning. And we get a few more like that. A few more life-changing ones, and just a few more. The proof that creating spaces where we feel seen, heard, and understood is not an additional extra to taking on some of the biggest challenges of the ages. It is the foundation. Now, this talk is called Resilience Without Burnout. That would be nice. And burnout can sometimes be, I need time off work, I need intervention, but also burnout can sometimes be just crawling by without fully living. Functional burnout. I see nods. Relatable? And what I want to bring to you as a proposition is that the idea of change-making without burnout is somewhat of a contradiction, unfortunately, because you care. You really care. Activism, change-making, making steps towards a better planet will move you in constant proximity to burnout because change-making is effing hard. There is no version of uprooting systems, of challenging oppression, of facing constant losses and feeling like voting for love leaves you on the losing team that does not involve challenge. Burnout is woven into the fabric of change-making, but that doesn't mean that you will burn out. I am not saying that you will burn out. Don't cancel me. Keep listening. Stay with me. I tried to eradicate burnout for years. I started this whole organization to do so until I had my aha moment. Of course, you're exhausted. This work is enormous. It is complex. It is intersectional. Of course you are fatigued. You're a 22-year-old up against the oil and gas lobby that's valued at $4.3 trillion. Of course, you're tired. Capitalism has devalued rest and the rent is due. Of course, you keep crying. You're stepping into a space of death and grief and anguish. Step 1 of truly avoiding burnout is to accept that in courageously calling for change, for a better world, the process of melting, creating, and making, it requires heat. You might get burnt. Step 2 is understanding our proximity to burnout at all times. So rather than remove it from the picture entirely, which is what I was trying to do, we can hold changemaking and burnout as a polarity. As a polarity, Kat. I understood the assignment. So these two become a dynamic together, right? So if burnout is not in the picture at all, it's not even in the room, then perhaps we can do more. Perhaps we can take more radical action. We can move closer to change. We can stand in the fire. And if we get too close, to make sure that we don't actually burn out, how do we pull back? How do we impose boundaries? How do we call in more support? Right? So it's this keeping burnout in the periphery, having an awareness of where we are in relation to it, is where we build resilience. And sometimes our tiredness is not burnout. If you've been tired, I sure have, ask yourself honestly, am I tired or am I impoverished? Am I poor? Am I deficient in all the things that make me feel alive? In joy, in connection, in spirit, in adventure, in dancing naked in your garden, whatever you do, I don't need to know. So my inquiry now is, how can parts of me feel exhausted? Of course they do. Look at the news. Look at our world leaders. Look at the surge of the far right. But how can other parts of me feel alive? How can my left toe feel burnt out? And how can my right elbow feel joy and whimsy and reverence? The late, great Joanna Macy, I wanted to mention her on this stage. She spoke about the greatest threat that we face as a society, and she wasn't talking about the far right or the climate crisis or widening inequality. She was talking about the deadening of our response. The greatest threat we face is the deadening of our response. We need to feel. We need to courageously feel all the good, all the bad, and know that it won't break us. It will propel us. You might already hear from my story the wisdom of burnout. And don't get me wrong, I don't advocate for burnout at all. It sucked. It sucks, right? But inside despair, I found purpose. Inside sadness, I found softness. Inside exhaustion, I found a leadership that shows up with vulnerability. And at this point in the talk, it feels like a heck of a lot of vulnerability. Last week, at our Resilience Residential, we did a gratitude circle. And someone said to me, Katie, I thank God every day. And I was so there. I said, yes, what do you thank God for every day? And she looked at me earnestly and she said, that you burnt out. And I didn't quite know how to take that. But sometimes when life squashes you like a tomato, the seeds hit the floor and something unexpected grows. And that is resilience, right? Not just the mountain, not just the rock, but the squashed tomato. That was Christiana Figueres. That was me. Maybe that is you. And if that is you, I see you. I love you. This nasty, nasty timer, which I won't look at, is telling me that we have only a minute and a half left together. Kat mentioned I was meant to be here last year, and I wasn't because I ended up getting very sick. And it was probably the stress of scaling this organization, right? Oh, let me go back. I got very sick, and here is my soft underbelly for you. I talk about burnout a lot, and I am not immune to it. I am not a machine. And in my own response to getting too close to burnout proximity, I decided to step back as CEO from my organization, bring on someone amazing, and I'm taking a big chunk of time off after this in 49 seconds, so let's hurry things along. And I bought a van, so things are good. And my friend Jamie Bristow, who is somewhere in this audience, he once said to me, people spend their time curious if it's a marathon or a sprint, and really it's neither. It's a relay race, that we are passing the baton to different people all the time, to different generations. And so maybe this IDG Summit is your invitation to pick up the baton, but for me in my van, it is time to temporarily pass the baton and take some rest. Thank you. So, being here, being with you, condensing 10 years of my life into 20 minutes feels so important to me because it feels like a standing ovation to my 23-year-old self. The burnt out bit, the squashed tomato. So well done, kiddo.
Wow. I remember how in one of our calls you said vulnerability is courage. I think you just stepped on stage with a lot of courage. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to keep you 49 seconds longer before your timeout. I'm curious. I really found it was interesting what you said about the proximity to burnout. That when we're doing something that is so important to us, we're almost always in contact, in close contact to that burnout. And as you just said, you laid down your position as CEO, you're just coming back from Kenya. Where are you in proximity to burnout right now?
That's a great question. I have been doing more work, right? So I went to Kenya to run this residential, and this whole speech I dedicate to them because I felt so inspired and so alive by hearing their stories and seeing their work and their commitment to their justice cases. So whilst some of that felt really tiring, and being here feels tiring, my left foot feels probably burnt out, maybe my left calf, the whole rest of me feels alive. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and I hope that you will have a lot of time now with your van that also makes you feel very alive. Thank you so much. Nothing more in between your time and your timeout. Thank you so much, Katie. Wow. Feels like we're slowly coming to an end, to a close of this. And as we do so, I remember a man that I stood on stage with for the first time. He's been one of the academic partners of the IDG since the beginnings. So we shared the stage at the partner gathering a few years ago. And I remember in our 10-minute conversation about the inner development goals, he managed to dismantle the concept of inner, the concept of development, and the concept of goals. I would say he's not a fan of labels. So honestly, I'm a bit scared to invite him back on stage. But apart from his outstanding skill of critical thinking, he's also one of the names when it comes to organizational learnings and system thinking. He's a senior lecturer at the Behavioral and Policy Sciences at MIT. Many of you will have spent the